All right, guys, this is Darude and I am in my studio and I'm going to do a quick run through of my remix for Gabriel and Dresden of their track 12 that is out now on Anjunabeats, and it's the Remedy remixed album that it's a part of. 12 was a track that when I first listened to the track, the intro of it, I heard like a broken beat. I heard drums with sort of broken rhythm, not 4/4. And then while I was listening to the track and I realized it being a 6/8 time signature, I just decided to try something quite crazy. So I cut 2 of the 6 beats of a bar out. So I got 4 beats, and even with that, the track sort of still worked, or the main melodic parts worked. And then when I got the actual separate parts of the track from the guys, it was quite easy to remove all the drums, and then just the synthy parts that I did use of theirs were nicely kind of fitting the 4/4 time. That said, when I made it from 6/8, cutting the 2 beats to be 4/4, it became something like 190 or 192 BPM, which is obviously way too fast for almost anything in our realm. So then I just slowed it down, time stretched what I needed, and selected drums that fit the 170 BPM. And that tempo range, it lends itself really well to drum and bass, which I've dabbled in a couple of times before, but not really released anything like that. So I did some studying and I started laying down some beats, and this is what we got. I'm going to play some of that beginning for you guys right now. These sounds right here are almost directly from the original, but now layered with some new bass and doubled that bleepy RP thing with another sound doing the same thing. So there. Also, another thing is that the original song or track doesn't have vocals, lyrics, anything whatsoever. And I just heard something with drum and bassy type of foundation and lyrics, good vocals to it. So I had that in the back of my head, and I just started making words for their track. And it's kind of silly. It just goes 12, it's for name's sake. There's my boys in charge when I drop it large. Just kind of silliness, kind of fun poking. But it actually turned out nice melodically and fitting the track really well. And Mr. Dave Dresden and Josh Gabriel, they both liked the track so much, they presented it to their record company Anjunabeats, who also liked it. So it's part of Gabriel and Dresden's Remedy remixed album that just came out on Anjunabeats. I used original parts here, something they call techno bass. It's this wobbly thing that does the same wobble in the original one, except now it's just missing those 2 beats in the end of the bar. This one is another one, it's called wobble bass. And so then I doubled those with a sound from Contact Library called Altron. So the lead is another one, of course, the main lead. That's how it's originally. I added a shaper box on top of it to have a little bit of attack sucking curve there, because there was a little bit of snappy attacks there, bad cuts and whatnot. And I was sloppy when I did it and didn't care, because I knew that I'm going to treat it after the fact a good bit. There's another shaper box that basically does shorten the release part of the sound quite a lot. And I've got a reason for that. So when you play it here, and with the delay on top, it needed some space, and it sort of needed a little room as well, because I'm adding a second sound on top. And it's just a synth from Nexus, and has quite a lot more attack, and so that's why I needed to take the attack out of the original sound, just to kind of marry these two sounds together, using the original but adding accent to it, and having control over and how much I wanted to cut through and how much attack there needs to be. As you can see from the waveform here, the original sound is opening up, filter opening up, then it's closing again. And I'm trying to mimic that with my own synth sound. And then also on this channel, I have high cut frequency programmed. That jumps up, as you can hear. That's pretty much it when it comes to those parts. Faceplant synth, it's called Big Hair Metal. And it replicates or duplicates the bass sound. The bass sound comes from my Sub 37. I started tweaking from a preset called Olympic, and it's here as audio. What's to notice here is that these are long, straight notes, but then later here, I have it pulsating, and what does that is a shaper box. So the first shaper box creates a little pocket for the kick drum, and the second one has a tiny bit of attack. Then it has this ducking thing in the end, so that it makes a pulsating thing out of the straight notes. So if you take this out, like that. The curious thing for me was how to make this a vocal track. So I first came up with some lyrics. It's very simple lyric, actually. It didn't take that long. But then how to sing it, what rhythm and what kind of melody, that was a typical me thing. It kind of happened as I went. I started singing on top. I started auto-tuning it really, really roughly just to get it going somewhere. But it wasn't until I put Waves Ovox on it that it actually started creating the melody for me, if you will. Ovox is a sound re-synthesizer that is a mix of a vocoder and talkbox and what have you. Anything that would be used to treat vocals in a sort of robotic way, or add harmonies or add other voices and whatnot. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. So right now I have these yellow vocals here, the bounced vocals that I created with Ovox. On top there is basically more like a melodic lead, and these here are the background vocals, and on their own they sound like this. And they came all from this. So this is me singing, and then first of all, I've got auto-tune roughly and mercilessly tuning single notes to the nearest so that the Ovox can treat it better. There is about 1 million presets in Ovox that you can go through and choose from, and I almost always start going through presets first, and then when I find something that is towards the direction that I like, then I just start tweaking from there, and this is what happened here as well. This plugin takes MIDI input from one of the synth tracks here, this one, and it sounds like this. This track was not used in a final mix. I had it there for quite a while, but then I realized I didn't need it. But this MIDI, these notes, do go to Ovox, and those are the ones that generate the harmonies of my singing just one lead line. And so that is there. The MIDI is on, but the audio is actually muted at all times. And when you listen to this here, and then if I am so bold and show you my horrible singing. 12, it's for namesake. So that's it. That's my vocal, but this generates harmonies from it. And there's all kinds of things that you can do with this. You can add less noise, more noise. You can use formant filters, which most of this I've done so that I've found something that works quite okay. And then I treat it how I want it to be, and then I bounced it, and then I made another copy with the same plugin, but one, for instance, with effects. This one has limiter, reverb, and delay. And one of these is bounced with effects, and one of them is bounced without the effects. And then after the fact, I treated those a little differently. For instance, the dry one, I still kept pretty dry, cut low end out of it, made it quite mono, and added a little high end. So it gives a little bit more of the clarity to the sound. So here's the dry. So the consonants and S's and whatnot come through better. And this one has more of muddiness and more of the low end there, but together they sound pretty decent like that. I have a vocal double that does kind of the same thing. This dry is even thinner than the other one. Important here is that I didn't exactly sing that line like that, but it generates it from the chords that I've played. And then over this process, I've actually changed a little bit of the voicings of the chords. And then I've also sang it differently. And then it's just trial and error to make it react how it has now done, or how it sounds now. And so this one is very much the chords only, except there's also this track. And again, this gives me more sibilance, more sort of clarity for the whole shebang. I don't know how well you hear it, but you have to take my word for it. When you have those whispers there, this is clearer in the whole mix. So that's what I call the background vocal, because that's the whole chord and all the harmonies. And then I have sort of the main lead vocals, and these again are my Le Horrible singing. Okay, so these are sort of the lead vocals. There's 3 layers of them, sang differently and then also treated differently. But I'll show short bits of my singing. 12 is for namesake. That already sounds a little bit treated because it's been through Melodyne and extreme pitch correction. But what's amazing here is that my vocal idea, my actual singing, is usable at least in a demo way, but in this case, it actually works in the context of the track as well. This is another vocal take. So first cleaning up the vocals as much as I could timing-wise and pitch-wise with Melodyne, bounced them, and now first one going through Manipulator and Auto-Tune, and then also Avox, adding 4 voices and equalizer in the back end. And then the second one is going through Vocal Synth, which is not exactly the same as Avox, but a similar thing where you can add harmonics, robot voices, and so on. It's a kind of a vocoder plus. And then the last one, the high one, again goes through Manipulator, and this time it's a preset called Mark and some tweaks on top of that. And this is the first one through Manipulator. The second one. Vocal Synth. And then the last one. So that's Manipulator again, and all of those together. And with the background vocal. That took me a good while to figure out. It was all trial and error basically, and also still a key thing in a track, even though I'm not the best singer in the world. In a sick, weird way, I'm very happy about these vocals. And I played it to my mom, for instance, and she wouldn't recognize me from there. So in that way, it's kind of cool. Generally, about this project, going through stuff. Finding effects, finding ear candy, and then one of the main parts, obviously, it's the drums. I found several good drum loops from a couple of different libraries, and then just started piecing them together, making enough variations, tuning drums. Then when I added 2 or 3 or 4 loops at sometimes layered on top of each other, I needed to cut something out so as to make room for all of the sounds. And in that, quite a valuable tool that I use is Waves Torque. And so I can show you here. This one is just a snare. But here is the original snare sample. So this is lower and it doesn't fit as it is. In this instance, I didn't actually use Waves Torque for the audio because it actually sounded better just tuning it old-fashioned way, just sampler kind of way, tuning it up. But what I did with Waves Torque here is I listened to it and it showed me the fundamental frequency of the body of the snare. So knowing it's G3 and my track is something where A snare works really well, I knew that I needed to tune it up 2 semitones. So which I then actually did on this channel and just used Logic's own transpose. I bounced it, and then on this channel it's actually the bounced a tune snare sample. I use Waves Torque often to tune drums, but in this case it kind of softened the hit in a way that I didn't like, but it was quite a good tool for me to see where the weight of the tuning is, and then I could just quite easily from there tune it where I wanted to. So these drums are from a couple of Loop Masters and Sample Phonics sample libraries. really digging these. What's worth noticing is that these samples are now all separate, all sliced from the main loop, but those libraries don't actually have them separate. So what I did was, obviously, like a kick alone was quite easy to get as is, but there were several that I needed to phase cancel, sort of to reverse engineer was where and how they came to be and how I got them on their own. So all of this that's a mutt, they are all now separate samples that I could manipulate timing wise and rhythm wise how I wanted to, which wasn't exactly possible with just the direct loop. It's a great basic loop that I have here, or a couple, but then I needed to quite drastically edit them to get the vibe that I needed. And for instance, this mutt loop has one or two more sounds that I just took out because I didn't need them there all the time. There is another added hi-hat. Kick or snare drum type of lifter there. Similar type of drum and bass loop, but with quite a little low end in that one. Now I have the bass line. This is the main bass line from Sub 37. I've doubled it with a silent bass line and a Spire bass line. And then this is a sampler, JP8 emulation. Just layering stuff. And here's Gabriel and Dresden original. And another one. And my addition to that. And then there's pads that come in here. Or ARPs. Two different sounds doing the same thing, sort of same volume-ish, and panned a little left and a little right so as to make it sort of a stereo sound here. Most of the synth tracks or buses, there's an effect called track spacer that creates space for the vocal when the vocal is on. For instance, of that pad sound, this is cutting between 351 and 2.1K, a few dBs down in that frequency band. Whenever the vocal's on, it's basically a multi-band compressor that you can set the frequency range and then sort of normally attack and release, and obviously a sidechain trigger for it. But then what you can do is you can either do it left and right, so normal, or you can do mid and side. And so when this ducks, you can duck from the center quite a lot, several dBs before you start hearing it when the sides of the synth are still actually intact. So that's quite a nice and handy and quite a purpose-built plugin track spacer. And the point of that is that just a couple of dBs of cut and it will give you clarity for the vocal. It will give you enough room. And if you cut more on the center and leave the synth sides intact, your ears are full that the synths are there, and it gives you the width and space feeling, yet you feel and hear the vocal in the center well. One more important sound that is in here, but you don't hear it too well unless it's alone. This is my Nord Lead 2 or Nord Rack 2. This baby there. That I programmed with MIDI to open the filter and so on, and then I recorded it down. It's dry without effects, but here I cut low and just a bit and added a little bit of delay and reverb on it to give it a little bit space. But you can't quite well hear it, but it's giving it a basic rhythm underneath everything. And then when we go to the breakdown, there's a part that only appears once in the whole thing, and it's this sort of piano thing. It comes from Face Plant. And there's two channels of it. It's the same preset, but they are tweaked a little different. So that was the first part, and the other one is the same sound-ish, but tweaked. And together it sounds like this. I actually thought of that part for a good while because I knew that that was the melody that I wanted to have there, but then it was strange to have that sound just once in a track, but then I decided that it belongs there and I put it there. Then quickly, I'm going to open the mastering project, because what I normally do is, if you look at these color-coded regions, that's usually about how I bounce these things out as stems, and then I take them to a fresh project that I call Stem Mastering Project. I still might EQ, compress, maybe add a little saturation to those single stems, and then I run it through my sort of usual mastering chain, and I'm going to show you that right now. So now we have the stem mastering project open. This ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stems. So there's the two vocal things, lead and backing. There's FX, there's drums, there's bass, there's pads, synth, other. This time I actually didn't have the kick separately, which I usually have, but now the kick was such a sort of integral and ready working and mixed part of the drum loop. But usually I have it separately so that even in the final stages I can check the kick ratio and mix it. But so all of them are here, and as you can see, color coded, that's how I like them. And then my mastering chain here is, first I have a gain plug that I can adjust the initial volume that the track is going to hit the first plugin. Well, the first plugin here is a linear EQ, which only is basically cutting at 25 Hertz, just to be sure that there's nothing below that taking up headroom / doing weird stuff. After that, I have R-Comp, which is Waves compressor that I've used forever, and it does very little, but it is very important that it's always in my mastering chain. What it does here, pretty much not even touching it right now, but when the track is on full go, my target is usually tops 1.5, maybe 2 dBs of gain reduction on this one. It doesn't do any crazy audible pumping or anything. It just has a certain kind of sound, and I also use it sometimes just as a second level control here. Because it in this track it peaks around -1.3 or 4 dB or something like that, I have +4 in the gain here. That's just happened to be like that this time. Sometimes due to the BPM of the track or the frequency content of the track, I change the attack and release here, but it's just a staple there. Then I have this crazy setting on Logic's own compressor, and this is, you know, threshold is -33.5. It's doing like 10 dB or 20 dB of gain reduction, but if you notice, it only does about 5%, so it's parallel compression. And technically it makes the sound quite bad on its own. You know, it's not supposed to sound like that, so I'm adding it a little bit, and here's the difference. So it adds a little bit of body, it thickens the sound, adds a little bit of level, a dB or two, and because it's all distorted, I only do it like 5%, and then you don't hear the bad distortion out of there because the clean sound is so prevalent over it, but it does something nice. And I always tweak the values a little bit according to the track, but pretty much this is my preset, and I've tried to use another compressor there. I've tried this and that, and I still prefer this. One of the main things is though that it has this wet dry control right in the front, and it's easy to adjust. So next in a chain is Waves Kramer Master Tape Saturation Unit. I use it with very mild settings. I have the whoa and flutter and noise in 0. This doesn't really do much. The flux, which is sort of the strength parameter, I have that in the very low end of it, and then I tune it so that it's peaking in a red area but doesn't do much. And you can tune that from these record and playback level, and you can link them if that works for you. Usually 15 is the speed that retains a little bit more in the high end and over bias. And then I go between bypass and this, and it just brings some magic there in the bass department especially. There's some roundness to it, something, and then like in mids, high mids, it does something, maybe widens it or something like that. To me, it matters when I bypass something and put it back on again, and if it sounds better when it's on, it's good. I can compare between my several settings, and for instance, the Waves plugins do have this A/B comparison setting, which is really useful for that kind of stuff. When it sounds good, and sometimes it would be maybe better to know the exact reason, but often I just trust my ears and go with that. Waves Vitamin is also quite important in my mastering chain. I very often mix the mids or low mids wider than they should be. So this thing does two things. You can, per these 5 bands, you can tweak the width of the mix or that band. I've set my band so that it's from about 1000 to 1800 hertz, and I've tweaked the width a little narrower there. Then the next band, nothing, but I pushed the harmonics or the excitement up a little bit, and the next band even a little more. And then that I've widened some, and then the high end is also excited a little bit, and then also pushed a little wider. It doesn't do much, but it does something. often cutting the low end or the mid's width a little bit makes it sound naturally less wide or too narrow for a second. But when you listen to it for a while, I think it's actually a good thing to have the lower end getting a little narrower towards, of course, like full mono in the kicks and low basses. Often, especially in a club system, it can be a problematic thing when you have stuff that already has panning information quite a lot in the mid frequencies. And then if that is too wide, it can sort of muddy up the sound quite a lot. After that, I have, curiously in this case, a match EQ. Why? Because I had a reference track that I compared my track to here in the mastering phase, and when I did that, I noticed a couple of things that then I was going to correct it with some other EQ, but then I realized that there's no point because this makes it sound good. And again, the difference is quite minimal. So I got quite close in my final mixing and then these other master tweaks that I have here. And then for this one, I've just basically squeezed. 9 dBs, 9.5 dBs, pushed it up so that I'm at the level where I sort of want to be. I've mastered this quite squashed, but it's still not even half as squashed that I come across sometimes. The over squeezing, over limiting kills the bass, which I'd never want to do. But what's here important to know also is that I didn't master the final product myself, but as I sent it to Anjuna, I actually took this limiting all the way out, so they had a mix that had a good bit of headroom and all the peaks and everything intact, and their mastering engineer did a master, and I've compared mine and theirs is a little better. It has a little more presence, a little more like mids and highs, sharper, and also in a certain way there's a little bit more bass. It's sort of pulsing a little better, so there's some mastering engineer done some mastering magic, which mine would have been maybe 90 or 95% and theirs is the 100% good, which I'm very happy with. Also here I have 3 different visual aids that I use when I final mix and master. Isotope Insight, there's loudness, there's spectrum, like a 2D spectrum, and then this spectrograph that is like live updating and shows me both, time-wise and frequency-wise where we are. Then width and the main levels. I also quite religiously use shaper boxes, volume shaper as a visual aid, because you can see how the waveform looks like. I like seeing it like that. While it is only visual, of course, but I can see my kicks are punching more than bass, for instance. The kicks are the loudest thing in the mix. That's important. It's just for me, for my visual sort of reassuring. And then I use something called Tonal Balance Control, which is a plugin that Isotope has analyzed about a gazillion tracks, different genres, different type of music. And they've made this balance curve type of thing where they have a margin for each frequency range where your basses should be, your mids should be, your highs and high mids should be. And if you look at this, I'm about there, except my highs seem to be a little high, and that didn't bother anybody in the chain of ears that I put this through, so I guess this is all right. So anyway, this is a quick look on my Gabriel and Dresden 12 remix. It was a fun project. It was sort of study of me doing some vocals. It was sort of study back into drum and bass type of sounds. And I really loved doing it. I loved hearing Dave's and Josh's thoughts after I sent it over. And a huge bonus was to get it actually released, because I wasn't sure if Anjunabeats was interested in drum and bass at all, but I decided to go with it anyways because I got an idea and I wanted to just sort of surprise my friend Dave and send it over, and how different it came out from their original track. So here it is. Go check it out. Gabriel and Dresden 12, the Darude remix, out on Anjunabeats. You can find it on Spotify and everywhere else. Go. Click the link. I'm going to put it in somewhere in the description. Ciao!